Hello all. Welcome once again to the Kindred UMC pre-recorded live show, coming to you pre-recordedly from Kindred Studio A here in my front room. I'm Chris Hayden. I'm the pastor of Kindred UMC.
Hi, I'm Courtney Young, and it's my birth week!
Hello all, and welcome to Kindred UMC. My name is Lambert Preston, and if you drive 25 and a 45 when it's raining outside, go home.
Okay.
Thank you.
You shouldn't be on the road.
You should not be.
Preston, did you hear the part where I said it was my birth week?
So what's the reading for this
It's
week?
birth week!
Okay.
Birth week, my birthday is
Okay.
1
Hey,
week
you know
from
what? This
today.
is my birth year. We should celebrate me all year.
Can we move you into a senior living facility finally?
Actually, by the time that this live show releases, it will be my birthday.
And you'll be 33.
So really, you should wish
33?
me a happy birthday.
Why?
Because it's my birthday today.
Can we move you
not.
into a senior living facility? That's what I'm asking. Can we move you to a home so we can save Matthew?
Anybody else out there who does this, just so you know, it's obnoxious.
You drive 25 and 45, 100%.
Preston loves
There's
birth
no-
week, because that is Chris.
You-
I was going to have confetti, but I forgot it at home.
Unless it's a round number, fucking have dinner with your friend or your
26.
spouse and be done with it.
26 is a round number.
26 means nothing.
Yeah, it's not even in the Bible.
26 means nothing.
It's not even in the Bible. People died at 25.
Go have dinner with your husband like a normal person.
Happy birthday to...
So we're continuing our series on King David, the rise and fall of King David. Here we are arriving at, I think it's the fourth week? I can't remember.
He already hit the guy in the head?
He hit the big guy in the head. He fell
Okay.
down, went boom. And
How big is big, by the way? Wasn't it like in the sevens, if we're saying
question
numbers?
I've been asking for a long time. We're going to be looking at the relationship between King David and King Saul, because even though David has been anointed king, he's not really functionally the king yet. There's still King Saul.
I think that's the real story, too.
So we're going to pick up in 1 Samuel chapter 18. But before we do, just a couple of things. So David defeats Goliath, wins the battle by defeating one person. And in the aftermath of that, gains the attention of King Saul, obviously, and becomes really good, like best friends, like soul bonded with his son Jonathan. And so now David is like in the inner court of the king. Like, so he's not King David exactly, even though he's been anointed King David. He's David, and he plays the lyre for King Saul in the court, and he's friends with his son. So, okay, we're going to read verses 6 through 16 in chapter 18. As they were coming home, when David returned from killing the Philistine, Goliath, the women came out of all the towns of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines and with songs of joy and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they made merry. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Saul was very angry, for this saying displeased him. He said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they've ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom?" So Saul eyed David from that day on. So Saul is he's kind of throwing a temper tantrum. Like, why do they like him? I'm the king. Who could be bigger than the king? That's kind of the layman's terms for what we just read. Verse 10, the next day, an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul threw the spear, for he thought, "I will pin David to the wall."
Oof.
But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. And David marched out and came in, leading the army. David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. When Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in awe of him, or in fear, similar words. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for it was he who marched out and came in leading them. So we're all on the same page. Let's brief story beats. Okay, so David kills Goliath, is invited into the inner court, becomes friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. As they're returning, everyone likes David more than Saul because he's the one who won the battle. And Saul is like, what the fuck? Like, and it says from that day on, begins eyeing David. And so one day, as David is playing the lyre in the throne room, Saul just he's had enough, and he tries to kill him with a spear. And David runs. And so Saul then puts David as the commander of the army. And that sounds like an honor, but it's a foreshadowing. Later we're going to talk about Bathsheba and Uriah. This is a foreshadow. Saul puts David at the head of the army so that he hopefully will be killed by the Philistines. That's the idea. Saul is trying to get David killed, get the enemies to do his dirty work for him. But instead, because the Spirit of God is not with Saul and is with David, and the reason for that is because Saul began taking, what do you call them? Like reaping the rewards from war that he wasn't supposed to. There's a word for it. I can't think of it. Anyway, COVID, fog brain. So David now has, the Spirit of the Lord is with David, but is not with Saul. And so David finds actual success at the head of the army, and it only makes things worse. So Saul trying to fix it by getting the Philistines to kill David actually makes his problem worse. David finds success because God is with him. So, have you ever been jealous?
I'm jealous of the phrase...
Is that a relatable premise?
No. I'm jealous of the phrase they get to use, they made merry. Like M-E-R-R-Y.
What do you mean you're jealous of the phrase?
I've never thought of that phrase.
You've never...
Hey,
have you never? You've made merry many times.
Hey, let's make merry.
We've made merry together many times.
I don't know if I like the sound of that.
Why? What do you mean?
I'm uncomfortable.
You ever been jealous, Courtney?
I think for me, yes, obviously, but I think for me, it mostly comes out in this comparison trap game. So it's not necessarily I wouldn't spear someone to the point of anger necessarily. My jealousy isn't an outward expression of how I feel about them. So I have two thoughts of this. One, it's I beat up on myself inwards for not being as good, pretty, fill in the blank, not having as much as XYZ.
Being obsessed with your birth week.
No, that has nothing to do with jealousy, and I will tell you the story about how birth week originated at a different point in time.
I think he's on something.
Fuck off. It's my birthday. But also, there's a line in an Olivia Rodrigo song called Jealousy, Jealousy that I've been
oh, really? Mm-hmm. We could have done that. Instead, we did the awesome Jesse's Girl.
That I've been repeating to myself a lot. That's your win is not my loss. And I feel like that I get caught up on that a lot. Just because... you're winning or you're winning doesn't mean that I'm losing in the end. But I feel like a lot of times it can feel that way.
So the story that I thought about when I was preparing for this is actually a good example of how that sometimes is not true.
Oh, interesting.
Or at least it doesn't feel that way.
Okay.
Because the umbrella of this story is everything worked out great. But so when I was in high school, I had the biggest crush on this girl, the older girl in the youth group. And she was pretty, she was a dancer, she was smart, all this stuff. And I was just and it almost defined my high school experience. I look back on how many girls hit on me. I didn't know that that's what was happening, but I look back on it and in my memory, I'm like, oh my God, I was doing much better than I thought I was, but I was just so hyper-focused on this one girl.
Right.
And so finally I couldn't stand it anymore. I wrote her a note, expressed all my feelings, and it didn't go great. She was she let me down gently, as one is wont to do in those situations.
And you are a nice person.
So. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. But after that, I remember it was some church event. We were in the sanctuary, and she went and sat next to, and his name was David, a friend of mine, David. She went and sat next to David, who was in my grade and whom I am better than in every measurable way. I'm taller than him. I'm smarter than him. I'm better looking than him. Like, every measurable way. And she had the nerve to sit. And I remember that very tangible feeling of jealousy. Now, it's ridiculous. Like, David is wonderful and like, was a friend of mine for a long time. And he actually died in a plane crash, which is very tragic.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. But in that moment, my friend became my enemy. Like, and all because of this stupid, misperceived thing. So, like, it got me thinking, why that? What the hell is that? And so here, and this is as often, my theory, it relates to, so I grew up with a lot of holes in me. There was a lot of care and a lot of love that was not given to me. I was abused emotionally for a long time. And it created like this hole and this insecurity in me. And I needed this thing to make me whole. It wasn't just like, why does he get hurt? It was like, I need her to make me whole. It was like an aggressive, and that's what led to this green-eyed monster jealousy kind of feeling. And so I started thinking about, like, I imagine Saul as this young kid not getting what he needed in some way, you know, and then being like, I'm going to prove myself to the world. I'll be the king. And then he becomes king, and it's still not filling that hole. And then along comes David, who is like fine and whole and like doesn't need anything from anybody. And it's like, I'll kill him. Like, and it's like there's something about that, about these holes that like live in us that we need to fill, that brings about not just jealousy, but all kinds of other things. So let me pause here and just like ask for reflection. What does that make you think of?
I think it plugs into your other podcast, like a jealous motivation, or I don't like to use the word evil anymore because it's weird to put that on people's conscience and stuff, but like a negative motivation. So like if you're talking
something that's harmful, not helpful.
Yes, yeah. To all parties, like including yourself,
it
which
won't
you
help
don't know.
you, and it won't help anyone else. It's only going to do harm.
But it's this like like a quick fix motivation. Like it has to work, and if it doesn't, then I don't know what else to do, and I'm at a loss. But I don't want to admit that to myself yet.
So usually we have kind of broadly one of two choices when we have things like this. When there's like these holes in us, one choice is, and this is what the church preaches far too often: wall it off. Don't feel it.
Right.
You don't feel sad because God loves you. So you don't feel sad. You don't feel angry because God's forgiven you. You don't feel that. And it's like, yeah, but what if I do?
Right.
What do I do now? What if I do? And not enough conversation in the church is around the what if I do, but I actually do. Instead, what we teach is, like,
pretend you don't.
Yeah, don't feel that way. Like, whenever you feel that way,
don't feel.
Yeah, whenever you feel that way, it's sinful and bad, and so don't. And of course, all modern research into this tells us that you can't just numb one feeling. You can't just ignore one experience. Anytime you do that, you're numbing your whole emotional experience. So as much as you don't want to grieve whatever happened, that in equal measure will prevent you from feeling joy or security or experiencing love. Like you numb everything. That's the only way that we work. We can't select.
I'd be bold to say that's why counseling and like divorce and marriage counseling has skyrocketed in the past, I think, 10 or 15 years. Since like making Christianity modern, still like bringing those tropes along from like way back to like suppress, do not feel, just be, or like just what.
So the thing I want to offer in response to this, because I think too much of the church has preached that for a long time. I actually want to reclaim an ancient tradition within Christianity, which is confession. Like the opposite of shove it, turn it off. Like, shout out to Book of Mormon, turn it off like a light switch. You can't do that. It'll always be there. It's like building a dam. Like you can build a dam to stop the river of whatever's coming through, but then that forms a lake, and then all kinds of things grow because it's still water, and new stuff happens in there. And just like, and then eventually it gets bigger and bigger, and you have to keep on building it, and then eventually it just breaks and it bursts forth. Like, so confession is the like traditional Christian response to that. Now, when I say confession, I think a lot of people get this image of, I go and tell a judgmental holy man what I've done bad. And that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about with confession is actually just putting words around what's really going on. Saying the truth out loud, and not even literally out loud, but like just internally. Like, so for me recently, so I just started a new relationship with a doctor. You do all the paperwork and you write down all your stuff and tell all your symptoms. And I've got back trouble, I've got insomnia, I have like some like racing heart palpitations, shortness of breath stuff after COVID, all that kind of stuff. So I wrote down all my symptoms, and like it was like the first thing he said to me after he introduced himself. He was like, "Hi, I'm Dr. So-and-so. Chris, nice to meet you. Great. So do you have anxiety?" It was like, that's not really how he did it, but that's what it felt like to me. And I was like, no, like no more than everybody else. Everybody else has been through quarantine and COVID. Like, we've all got anxiety.
Everyone else also exists. Yeah. Like, everyone's got a little bit of existence. Yeah.
So ever since he asked me that, I haven't been able to get that question out of my head. The night after he asked me that, I woke up in the middle of the night and couldn't go back to sleep because I was just like, what if everything goes away? And I was like, holy shit, I have severe anxiety. I think I've had it for a long time. I think I've had it for a while and have just been putting it off and ignoring it. And so I have a covenant group, was what we like, other pastors who we text each other all the time and constantly stay in touch and like see how we're all doing. And so I brought it up with them, and I was like, yeah, I think I've got a follow-up appointment. And then all of them were like, you're going to call a counselor today.
Wow.
And I was like, okay.
Bold.
But so like, that's what's scary about confession, though. So like,
it's the addiction process.
I took the first step of naming it, and that already was like, I do have anxiety.
Yeah.
And then the scary part is, especially when you share it with people, is that now you're going to be accountable to it, and that's what always prevents people from
doing
naming
anything
it or labeling it. And it's a counterintuitive process, man. We have to submit ourselves to something. We have to die to ourselves. We have like forcing it down by your own might is not going to work.
I have something on this too, just in the medical vein. So I just went to the ER after having this weird throat thing. After a few times it came back, and I'm going to an ENT tomorrow if anyone cares. But my whole thing when I was in the ER, I was like, they're asking me, how do you sleep? How do you sleep at night? How is this? How is that? And I would say, 8 hours, just normal, fine. And then they'd leave the room, and I would yell at myself in the ER room. Why did you lie about that?
Yeah, why would you lie about
You haven't had 8 hours of sleep for whatever. But I'm like, why are you lying to a doctor? Why are you lying to someone that's not going to... I have this weird fear that they're going to call my parents, or someone else is going to know.
Yeah.
And I'm in trouble for, I don't know what, for not taking care of myself or something. So when I go to this ENT tomorrow, I'm literally going to throw up words to them. All of this is happening, and I feel like this.
Yeah,
and
these
I have
are the real truths.
There's a reason I'm paying you, and I cannot...
power in confession.
Yeah, it's the same exact thing. It's like I'm just giving in, or again, the surrender. Just like, put your feet up in the river and let the river just take you for a second.
And I really truly believe that this. So like, people take things way too literally in Scripture. This, I think, is what Jesus is talking about when he talks about those who wish to gain their lives must lose it, and those who wish to protect their lives will lose their lives.
Right.
Like, the last shall be first, the first shall be last. It's these concepts. It's the idea that, hey man, you want real healing? You're going to have to surrender and become weak and humble yourself before the thing that's crushing you. And when you actually do that and name it, and especially if you can do that with someone who is trustworthy, who can help you, holy shit, you will regain your life. Like your identity, your purpose, your joy, your gratitude for like who you are and just the sheer fact that you exist can come rushing and flooding back. But it is going to have to come through an act of surrender and an act of confession and an act of humility.
I want to say this before I forget it too. I've said it a few times. Journaling is a like non-disclosed, crazy way to put all your thoughts down without anyone else seeing it. Save it in a folder somewhere else on your computer where you find 6 years later and see how you were on that day specifically. Keep it weekly or whatever. And then not only should you find counseling, it doesn't necessarily have to be with a counselor that you have to pay for. Find somebody that's close enough to you that you believe will tell you the truth about something you don't necessarily know about. So a best friend or a sibling that you're very close to where you can just throw up on them figuratively everything where they can critique it. It's this confession vein again. It's the weirdest feeling to just get things out that you're constantly spinning over every day.
I would be remiss if I did not say, if you're not dealing with a specific like diagnosable psychological thing, but if you're just generally kind of like, I do want to work on that stuff, that's exactly what our discipleship is.
Yeah.
So if you are interested in that and you want to follow up, really seriously, truly, you can email us at kindredumc@gmail.com. We basically do a disciple group every season or so. We kind of do one for 12 weeks and then we take a break and then we kind of gather more people and we can we've done Zoom for people to like Zoom in or Discord in or whatever. Like we can do it virtually, we can do it in person, like whatever. But don't go this alone thinking that you have to just shove all of your stuff down and like keep a stiff upper lip. That's not the way to do it, and that's not the biblical model. That's not what the church ought to be teaching. The real truth of this is find a trustworthy covenantal like place where you can trust people and really truly label what's going on. And you would be, that's like 90% of the fight is just admitting it to yourself and saying it out loud to someone you trust who can help you. And that is the way to life and healing. So, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.
I wish that I had Jesse's girl.